I texted the family group chat. Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? After I had just returned from settling my father's estate abroad, my brother replied, "We're busy, try a taxi." My mom added, "Stop expecting handouts." I simply wrote, "No worries." But what they saw on the evening news when my name was announced. I stared at the screen, my throat tight. All I could manage to type back was, "No worries." But what they saw that evening on the news was something they never expected. The flight home felt endless. I sat pressed against the airplane window, watching clouds pass by, wishing my dad was still alive to meet me at the airport the way he always used to. He had been the one person in my life who made me feel seen. Now he was gone, and I had spent weeks closing accounts, selling his old belongings, and signing papers that felt like they erased him piece by piece. By the time the plane touched down, I was exhausted. My body ached, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. More than anything, I just wanted to walk out of the terminal and see someone waiting for me with a hug. That's why I sent the message. It wasn't much to ask, just a ride from the airport, a small sign that I wasn't completely alone. I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for a kind reply. When Daniel's message came through, "We're busy. Try a taxi," I felt my chest sink. And when my mom followed with, "Stop expecting handouts," it was like a blade twisting inside me. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I was an adult and I could handle things on my own. So, I texted back, "No worries," as if it didn't bother me, but it did. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. At baggage claim, I watched families reunite all around me. Parents hugged their kids. Friends laughed and carried each other's bags. Couples kissed as if no time had passed. I stood there alone with my suitcase, forcing myself not to cry. When I finally got outside, the evening sun was setting over the parking lot. I dragged my bag toward the taxi line, telling myself to stay strong. If my family didn't want to be there for me, I would stop expecting them to be. But in the back of my mind, a question kept echoing. If this was how they treated me after losing Dad, what would it take for them to finally see me for who I was? The taxi ride home was quiet, but inside my head, everything was loud. The driver tried to make small talk, asking if someone was picking me up, and I forced a laugh, saying my family was just busy. My voice cracked as I said it. I turned to look out the window, hoping he wouldn't notice. Watching the city lights blur past, I felt the truth pressing against me. I had no one waiting. When we pulled up in front of the house, I carried my suitcase to the porch alone. The place looked the same as our white shutters, the flower beds my dad used to take care of, and the porch light that always burned too dim. But it felt different now. The warmth that had once been there seemed gone, replaced by something cold. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dinner. My mom was at the sink, rinsing dishes. She glanced up, surprised to see me. "You made it," she said, flatly, as if I had just come back from the grocery store instead of flying halfway across the world after burying my father. Daniel was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone. He barely looked up. "Taxi wasn't too bad, right?" he muttered, more like a joke than a question. I stood in the doorway, holding my suitcase, waiting for some kind of hug, some gesture that said they were glad I was home. None came. I forced a smile and wheeled my bag upstairs, telling myself not to expect anything else. Later that night, I sat on my bed, surrounded by the boxers I had shipped back from my father's estate. Inside were photos of him, old letters, and little things he had kept over the years, souvenirs from trips. A watch he always wore, a leather notebook full of his thoughts. Holding those items, I felt the weight of everything I had just lost. I needed comfort, but instead, I had silence from the people who should have cared most. That silence began to dig at me. I thought about the group chat again, the cold replies from my mom and brother. For years, I had tried to believe our family was just complicated, that maybe I was too sensitive, that maybe I expected too much. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had always been the one left out. Growing up, Daniel was the golden child. He got praised for everything. Good grades, sports trophies, even the smallest achievements. My mom adored him. When I tried to share my own accomplishments, they barely registered. I still remember the day I got accepted into college with a scholarship. I told my mom, waiting for her excitement, but all she said was, "Don't expect us to help with money." Then she turned back to Daniel, who was talking about his new job. The memories stung worse now because Dad wasn't here to balance it out. He was the one who had always seen me, who asked about my day, who told me I was strong even when I doubted myself. Losing him felt like losing the only shield I had in this family. That night, lying awake, I thought about the way Mom's text had sounded in my head. "Stop expecting handouts." As if asking for a ride meant I was begging. As if wanting their presence meant I was weak. My chest tightened with anger and sadness tangled together. Why did my own family see me as a burden? I tried to distract myself by unpacking, but even the simple act of opening the boxes brought tears. My dad's watch slipped from its wrapping and landed in my palm. I held it to my chest, whispering, "I wish you were here." The house was silent, but in my heart, I could almost hear his voice telling me I deserved more. Downstairs, I heard laughter. My mom and Daniel joking about a TV show. Their voices carefree. It hit me hard. They could laugh while I sat upstairs drowning in grief. They could move on like nothing had changed, while I carried the weight of the estate, the memories, and the loneliness. I closed my eyes and thought, maybe I don't belong here anymore. Maybe I never did. The conflict wasn't just about a ride from the airport. It was about years of being unseen, years of being told in subtle and direct ways that I didn't matter as much. And now, with Dad gone, the cracks were no longer hidden. They were wide open, and I was standing right in the middle of them, alone. I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep waiting for love that was never going to come. But at that moment, all I felt was the sharp sting of rejection, the ache of being invisible in my own family, and the desperate need to prove, if not to them, then at least to myself, that I was worth something. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and an empty feeling in my chest. My suitcase still sat half open on the floor, clothes spilling out, and the boxers from Dad's estate were stacked against the wall, like silent reminders of everything I had carried alone. For a few minutes, I just sat there staring at them, remembering the weight of the group chat messages, the coldness in my mother's voice, and the way Daniel laughed on the couch downstairs as if nothing in the world was wrong. I knew, if I stayed in that bed, I would sink deeper into the same cycle, waiting for them to care, hoping for a sign that would never come. Something inside me whispered that I had to stop waiting. I had to choose myself for once. I opened one of the boxes and pulled out Dad's leather notebook. The pages were filled with his neat handwriting, but a little faded with age. I flipped to the last page he had written on. His words weren't meant for me, but they felt like they were. The measure of a life isn't who remembers you at home, but what you leave behind in the world. Reading that, something shifted in me. My family might never see my worth, but that didn't mean my life had no worth. Dad had worked so hard to leave something meaningful behind, and maybe it was up to me to carry that forward. I decided right then that I would not let my mother's dismissive words or Daniel's indifference define me anymore. If they couldn't meet me at the airport, if they couldn't meet me in my grief, then I would stop expecting them to meet me at all. I would find another way to honor Dad, another way to give meaning to the pieces of his life I had carried back. That day, I made a plan. I gathered the most important items from the boxes, his photographs, his watch, his letters, and the documents from his estate. Instead of keeping them hidden in my room, where no one valued them, I called a local library archive. I asked if they accepted personal collections to preserve for future generations. When the woman on the phone told me yes, that they would be honored to include my father's life's work, I felt a wave of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I packed everything carefully into a bag and took the bus into town. As I walked up the steps of the library, the afternoon sun warming my back, I realized how symbolic the moment was. My family had shut their doors to me, but here I was, opening new ones myself. Inside, the archivist smiled as I handed over the items. She listened as I explained who my father was, how he had lived, and why his memory mattered. She nodded with respect and told me that his legacy would be safe there, cataloged for others to learn from and appreciate. Walking out of the library, I felt lighter. I had turned my pain into something lasting. And while it didn't erase the rejection from my family, it gave me something stronger, a sense of control, of purpose, of freedom. When I returned home that evening, Daniel barely glanced at me as he ate dinner in front of the TV. My mom asked, "Where have you been?" in the same tone she used when she noticed a missing carton of milk. I thought about telling her what I had done, but I stopped myself. For once, I didn't need her approval. Instead, I went upstairs, sat on my bed, and deleted the family group chat from my phone. My thumb hovered over the button for a second, but then I pressed it, and the thread disappeared. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was liberating. That night, I lay down and thought about my dad's words again. He had taught me that life was about what we leave behind, not about who ignores us. My mother and brother had made it clear that they would never see me. But that didn't mean the world wouldn't. The turning point wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet choice made alone in my room, surrounded by my father's memory. I chose to stop chasing their love and start creating my own path. And even though I didn't know what would come next, I felt stronger than I ever had before. That evening, the house was quiet except for the sound of the television playing in the living room. My mom sat at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, and Daniel stretched out on the couch with his feet propped up, half watching the evening news. I stayed in my room upstairs, lying on my bed with the faint hum of the broadcast drifting through the walls. The day had been long, but different. I felt lighter after giving away Dad's belongings, as if I had released part of the burden I had been carrying alone. For once, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval or attention. I had made a choice for myself. Still, a small ache lingered in my chest, a sadness that my family would never understand what I had done or why. Downstairs, the anchor's voice on the news grew louder as a breaking story banner flashed across the screen. My brother glanced up lazily, expecting some political issue or sports headline. Instead, a photograph filled the screen of my photograph. The anchor began to speak. Today, a young woman named Ava Monroe returned home after settling her late father's estate abroad. In an extraordinary act of kindness, she donated his personal collection of journals, letters, and artifacts to the city's historical archive. This generous contribution ensures his memory will be preserved for future generations. Alongside the donation, Ms. Monroe also directed a portion of her inheritance to fund a scholarship program for underprivileged students. Daniel sat up straight, the phone slipping from his hands. "Wait, that's Ava," he said, his voice sharp with disbelief. My mom turned toward the TV, her eyes narrowing, then widening. She pressed a hand against her mouth as the camera cut to footage of me outside the library earlier that day, speaking quietly to reporters. On the screen, my voice was calm and clear. My father believed that life should be about what you leave behind. This was his legacy, and I'm honored to share it with others. The camera showed me handing over the boxes, smiling faintly as the archivist shook my hand. Then it cut back to the news anchor, who added, "This story has already touched many in our community." One local resident described her as a woman of quiet strength, someone who turned personal loss into something meaningful for others. The living room went silent. My mom sank into a chair, staring at the screen as if she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, his face pale. "She never told us," he muttered. "Why didn't she say anything?" My mom whispered, more to herself than to him. "What have we done?" Her voice shook as she added, "Upstairs, I heard the news continue. They talked about the scholarships, about how Dad's journals would now be available for future historians, about how people admired the decision I had made." My name kept repeating on the broadcast, each time heavier, each time sharper, each time sinking deeper into the silence of the house. For years, my family had brushed me aside, treated me as if my needs and accomplishments didn't matter. But now, without warning, they were forced to see me not through my words, not through my pleas for attention, but through the eyes of strangers who valued what I had done. I didn't come downstairs. I stayed in my room, listening as the silence in the living room grew heavier than I had ever heard it. I imagined my mom's face as she replayed her own words in the group chat. "Stop expecting handouts." I imagined Daniel hearing his own reply. "We're busy. Try a taxi." Now, against the backdrop of the news, those words sounded cruel, heartless, impossible to take back. For once, I wasn't invisible. For once, they had no choice but to recognize me. The television went quiet again after the story ended. No one in the house spoke. The silence wasn't the same as before. It was the silence of guilt, of realization, of regret. And while I sat alone upstairs, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter anymore. I felt powerful in a way I had never experienced because I had learned something important. I didn't need them to validate me. The world outside these walls had already done it. The climax of my story didn't come from them suddenly changing or finally apologizing. It came from me choosing to step outside of their shadows and the world seeing me for who I truly was. The house felt different after the news broadcast. The silence that filled the living room wasn't the usual kind where everyone minded their own business. This time, it was heavy, thick with words left unsaid. My mom sat staring at her phone, scrolling back through the family group chat as if she could erase the messages she had sent. Daniel paced near the window, muttering under his breath, replaying the news clip in his head. And me, I stayed upstairs, sitting quietly on my bed, hearing every movement below, like echoes of a story that no longer belonged to me. Later that night, my mom knocked on my door. She opened it slowly, her face pale, her eyes glassy. For the first time in years, she looked unsure of what to say. "Ava," she whispered, "why didn't you tell us?" Her voice cracked as she asked it, as though she couldn't understand how I could do something so important without her knowing. I wanted to tell her the truth that I had stopped telling them things because I had grown tired of being ignored, tired of being dismissed. Instead, I just said, "You never asked." The words landed like a stone, and she flinched. She lingered for a moment, as if she wanted to apologize, but no apology came. She closed the door and left me alone again. The next morning, Daniel tried his own version of reaching out. As I passed him in the hallway, he said awkwardly, "Hey, that was cool what you did yesterday." His tone was flat, forced, like he didn't know how to admit he was wrong. I nodded politely, but didn't stop to engage. I had already learned not to lean on words that came too late. What surprised me most wasn't their regret. It was my lack of need for it. The old version of me would have clung to those small gestures, hoping they meant my family was finally changing. But now, I saw them for what they were. Delayed reactions born out of guilt, not genuine love. And I realized I didn't need those crumbs anymore. Instead of waiting for their acceptance, I began to focus on the response from the outside world. The next few days were filled with emails and messages from strangers who had seen the news report. Some wrote to say they admired my strength. Others thanked me for inspiring them to give back to their communities. A high school teacher even asked if I would come speak to her students about resilience and generosity. Each message reminded me that my value wasn't tied to whether my family chose to see me. My worth came from my choices, my actions, and the difference I could make. My dad had taught me that, and now, I finally understood. At home, things remained tense. My mom and brother acted more carefully around me, like they were trying not to push me further away. But I had already moved past the stage of needing them to prove anything. I spoke when I needed to, stayed quiet when I wanted to, and refused to shrink myself just to keep the peace. One evening, I sat in the backyard with my dad's notebook in my lap. The air was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I flipped to the page I had read before, the one about life being measured not by who remembers you at home, but by what you leave behind. This time, the words didn't sting. They felt like a map guiding me forward. I whispered into the fading light, "I get it now, Dad. I don't have to beg for love. I just have to live in a way that honors who I am." That night, for the first time since returning from abroad, I slept without tears. The aftermath of the rejection I had faced wasn't just pain. It was a transformation. I stopped being the invisible daughter waiting at the airport for a ride that would never come. I became the woman who created her own path, who turned grief into action, and who no longer needed to explain herself to people unwilling to listen. And while my mom and brother were left to wrestle with their guilt, I carried something far more valuable: freedom. Freedom from waiting, freedom from disappointment, and freedom from measuring myself against the love they couldn't give. I don't know if they'll ever truly understand what they lost when they dismissed me, but I do know that I found something much greater. I found my voice. I found my strength. And I found peace in knowing that my father's legacy and my own will live on in ways that no cold text message could ever erase.